Welcome to Reliability Matters, a podcast for the electronic assembly industry. Each episode covers topics related to reliability, best practices, and environmentally responsible assembly techniques, with insights from experts across the electronic assembly industry. Now, here's your host, Mike Konrad.
Welcome back to the Reliability Matters podcast. I'm so glad you're with me today. Today, we're going to talk about contract manufacturing. Do you have a circuit assembly that needs to be built? Don't have enough equipment in-house or enough bandwidth or specialized expertise to build it? You may be best served by utilizing the services of a contract manufacturer. Contract manufacturers come in all shapes, sizes, and capabilities. Should I seek out a Tier 1 manufacturer? How about Tier 2 or 3 or 4? And what does Tier stand for anyway? Should I have my assemblies built overseas or in-country? What about issues such as ITAR? Who will be providing the components? What if I need more than just boards assembled? What if I need design, testing, or box build? To answer these and many more questions, I've invited my friend and colleague, David Raby, to be my guest. David is the president of STI Electronics, founded in 1982 by David's father, the late Jim Raby. For those who have been around the industry for some time, you'll know Jim Raby for his work with the U.S. Navy in establishing military standards for electronics manufacturing and the development of the NASA and Department of Defense soldering schools. Over the past 40 years, STI Electronics has expanded its focus from consulting and technical seminars to providing training, laboratory analysis, advanced research and development, microelectronics assembly, prototyping, and small to medium volume PCB contract manufacturing for the electronics industry. David graduated from Auburn University with a bachelor's degree in aviation management. So let's begin our conversation with Dave Raby. Hey, Dave, welcome back.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me.
Well, it's always a pleasure to invite a guest, and particularly one that's done it before and is still willing to come back. So,
I appreciate you having me back.
You've been warned and you have the experience. So for those who may not be aware, there's a little spin-off of this podcast called Concept to Creation, where we get into, we talk to entrepreneurs and business owners, CEO type people who were crazy enough to get in, to leave the security of a 9-to-5 job with a paycheck that comes every week, and to go off on their own. And you did something even scarier. You joined the family business, which I've been involved in a family business, and it could be quite challenging in so many different ways because the stakes are so much higher. But for those who are interested in the journey side, David and his family's journey into entrepreneurship, I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes. So if you're listening to this podcast on your favorite podcast app, just check out the show notes. There'll be a link to that episode. It's much less technical in nature. It's a little bit more a journey, the story of a journey, entrepreneur journey, and the challenges and joys and risks and all that crazy stuff that goes on in building a business, and particularly within a family dynamic. If you're watching this on YouTube, just click, somewhere down here, there's a button that says Show More. Click the Show More button, and you'll see a link to that show. So today, David and I are going to talk about contract manufacturing, which is basically exporting all your trouble and giving it to somebody else to work out. I wanted to, we want to talk about the contract manufacturing industry in general. And as I said in our intro, contract manufacturers come in all shapes, sizes, capabilities, things like that. Let's start with this tier structure. We've all heard of, or people at least in the EMS industry, heard of the term Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, et cetera. Walk me through the tier structures. What is a Tier 1 and how does that differ from maybe a Tier 4?
Okay, well, great way to start on the first question is I really don't know the definition of it. But a Tier 1, that's the big guys. Those are the ones that are building cars or they're working directly for their OEM, which is the original equipment manufacturer. Like I said, they are the big guys talking in the billions of dollars.
So enough. You may not know the specifics, but you're not a Tier 1 then. I think
no, we're going to get Tier 2 They supply to tier one generally. A lot of times they're building subsets of something or something like that for tier one. Tier three, which is like $100 million to $500 million a year, they're building for tier two or tier one. Tier four is less than 100 million. That's generally as far as the tiers go, is less than 100 million. We're probably like a tier 8 if you're going on this scale, but I don't think dictionary wise there's a definition for that.
Yeah, I did a little research, and I'm not sure how accurate this is. If I can go on the philosophy, if Google says it must be true, then this is obviously true. But tier one, somewhere greater than $5 billion in revenue, and tier two, 500 million to 5 billion, somewhere in between there. And then three is, as you mentioned, about 100 million to $500 million, and then tier four, less than 100 million. I would assume that the majority of contract manufacturers probably fall into the four category, and then there's a handful of tier ones. Tier ones would be the Jables and Selectrons and
right.
Those types of
I would
companies.
imagine that's a pretty good pyramid.
Yeah, it numbers way bigger than I could totally fathom. Anyway, if I'm an OEM, or if I'm in if I have the need to produce 100 boards, I have a small project. Maybe it's prototype, maybe it's just a small run, or a legacy board, that I have to repair for the Army or something. I could go, technically speaking, I guess I could go to a tier one, and if they're crazy enough to take it, they're probably not going to touch it. They're probably going to send it down the ladder. But based on your experience, should a company with a small volume need just go directly to tier four or smaller, or is there an advantage in dealing with the quote unquote, the big gorilla in the room, or what would your advice be to where to start looking? At least eliminate, through the process of elimination, eliminate the people that would just make no sense.
Yeah, and I'm going to answer this question the way that I'm probably going to answer a lot of questions today with, it depends. But you are correct. You probably don't want to go directly to a tier one with the 100 boards. For the most part, they're going to laugh at you if you do that. However, there are some of the places, and you mentioned Jabil. I know they have a new product development lab that they can build smaller volumes, but I think they're mainly interested in those if they're going to turn into something to a much larger volume. And you can walk your way down the other tiers, and I think you're going to get that same answer. So I think your best bet is going to be going to the tier four, simply because 100 boards, that's a decent order for us. And it is something that we pay attention to, and we're happy to get. We're going to take our time and make sure you get the care that you deserve from it and that you want from it. Where you can imagine if you throw 100 boards into a place that's building millions every day, you're probably not going to get that one-on-one attention that everybody feels like they deserve.
Right. You call Jabil and you say, I want to get the status of my 100 boards. They say, I'll call you back. And they call the tier three, who calls the four. And then maybe 3 days later, you get an answer back.
Right.
Yeah, deal with the source. I think that makes a lot of sense.
And the answer may end up being you're right in line behind iPhones.
Right.
Right. As soon as we finish building iPhones, we'll build your 100.
That's right. Yeah, and then we'll put them somewhere on a container ship, and they can spend the next 6
Right.
months at sea waiting to be unloaded. So, when I think of contract manufacturing, I think a very simple term. I think there's a printer and a reflow, a pick and place machine and a reflow oven, and you print the board, reflow mount the components, and reflow the board, and then ship it to the customer. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes on beyond just those three basic steps. Mm-hmm. We can use STI as an example, since that's what you're most familiar with. What other types of services does STI offer beyond the solder paste, pick and place, and printing option? What else generally goes on, not just at STI, but kind of in general with all the process steps to build a board?
Okay, well, your three major steps, that's correct. The idea is you're giving your product away to somebody that's going to send it back in a finished form, or at least in most cases, at least the boards being finished and assembled. But as far as what else we can offer, we can do engineering support. Or is your board designed to where it's easy to manufacture? We're not going to, STI is not going to redesign your whole board from scratch, but we will help make it to where it's easier to manufacture and give suggestions on that. We have an analytical lab, so we can go in and look at what the parts are made out of and see how everything goes together on that. If there's any issues in the manufacturing, we're going to do sufficient testing to make sure that before they come to you, they're all good. We can do that. Can be it's always going to be visually inspected, but there's also electrical testing we can do if you require it. We have a clean room. If you've got a product, we're working on medical products that have to meet certain cleanliness requirements, that they're built in a clean room, and we have that capability. Do you want us to be able to repair and refurbish parts that you've already shipped to customers? That's something under warranty that breaks down the road. What are you going to do with it? Is that something you want us to handle? We do that for people all the time. Primarily, we're just assembling the circuit boards, putting the parts on those, but some places want us to do a box build where we're actually building the board and then putting screws in boxes and putting it in its final form. Sometimes we will warehouse things where you'll order 1,000 of something, but you only want 500 shipped right now, and you want us to hang on to the others till you need them. We do that sometimes, and we have some customers that we will ship directly to their customer, that we've worked up a trust with them that they know what we send out is going to be good, and they'll just send us, here's the shipping label to the customer we want it to go to, and we can do that. And most places we don't do that. Most of the time, if we're building for you, we're going to ship them back to you and let you do what you do with them after that.
Sure, that makes sense. So if I needed 1,000 boards over a year or so, but I only needed 100 every month or so, would most contract manufacturers use this economy of scale and build all 1,000 at the same time, or does it make some sense to pace out the manufacturing or the assembly in case something changes? What would your take generally be on that?
You mean things can change?
Well, things are in this business. Yeah, they're like they're like one of those metronomes. That tick 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 tick. I think that's the speed of which our industry changes.
No, you're exactly right. And back to my first answer is it depends.
Right.
From my point of view, from your point of view, is the product going to change over the next 12 months? Because you don't want me to build 12 months worth and then a month from now be pulling 11 months off the shelf and reworking them, because that gets expensive for both of us. From my point of view, if we have all the parts and you're confident it's not going to change, I had much rather build them all at one time, because it is a lot more efficient. It's cheaper. It's easier to make sure we've got the quality right and everything if we can build them all at once. One thing I am going to insist on in that case, especially if I've had to buy the parts, then I want to be paid for what I'm building. I don't want to do the work and wait a year to get paid while we ship that monthly.
So I had an experience, and I've shared this story on this podcast a couple of times, so sorry to my regular audience for the redundancy. I was hired as an expert witness to represent a contract manufacturer in a civil case where an OEM contracted with the CM, wrote up a very poor statement of work. And to give you an example, they wanted the contract manufacturer to purchase boards, to acquire the board and handle the fabrication. And under the board material, and I quote, FR down and dirty FR4, nothing special. That was on the statement of work, right? So if I was a contract manufacturer, I would just presume from that one description that they really don't care much about quality. This is probably a product that has a short life expectancy, maybe planned obsolescence, maybe an electronic flea collar or something like that, which it wasn't, by the way. But that just, to me, is a crystal ball kind of, the tea leaves say they don't care a whole lot, so neither do I. But then they also required this product to be tested and baked out for a specific period of time and then potted in a silicone encapsulant material. And over the time that they were building boards, they needed more boards than the CM can produce in the given time. They were funded by venture capitalists, and the VCs were wanting basically weekly shipping reports, and they were pounding their fist on the table to get more product delivered. So the OEM basically said, cut the testing in half. And at some point when some of the ovens broke, they said, don't bake. And the CM thought that we'll send out a letter saying this is not best practice, but if you want us to do it, just acknowledge. And they acknowledged, and products began to fail. There was a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. 50,000 products had to be recalled. And of course, they blamed the CM because they said the CM should have said no, which is practically true, right? But legally, maybe not. Maybe it's a little CYA letter, and but it still got them sued, and they still spent hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on attorney's fees, maybe more. So my question to you as a CM is, what level of responsibility does a CM have to take when the customer is asking for something that is not best in class or worse? Based on your experience and your knowledge, will fail. How do you have those tough conversations with the client or potential client? And ultimately, have you ever been put in a position where you just had to say, I'm sorry, this is just not for us?
Yes. We have, if you come to us with a product you want built, we're going to go through with you what requirements do you want this built to. The simple version is there's 3 levels of IPC, which is the industry standards. Level 1, level 2, and level 3. The level 3 are the high reliability type items. Level 1, I always think of as your kid's toy. You mentioned the dog collar or something like that. We're going to ask a lot of questions to make sure we're building what you want, and you can tell when somebody doesn't know what they want or is not familiar with those. In a lot of cases, anyway, you can tell, which throws up some red flags on our end to ask a lot more questions. Like the supplier you just talked about, we would probably be sending out, make sure it was in writing that we suggested this, but you said, no, don't do this. If we're supposed to be baking boards, if that's something we bid on or quoted on, and all of a sudden you tell us to cut that out, we want it in writing from you that we cut that out. And we may or may not say, we're having this problem now that we've cut this out. So yeah, it's a sensitive thing because you're always trying to look for a way to cut the cost down, and in a lot of cases you're the one doing the testing. So from our point of view, if you're happy with it and it's working like you want it to, we think we're doing the job you want us to. They're like, if we get somebody that says build this down and dirty, that is going to throw up a lot of red flags. And like I said, we're going to ask a lot more questions. But
I think there's going to be two common answers to pretty much every question I ask you. One of them is going to be it depends, and the other is it's all communication, communicate. So you're a aviation. You have an aviation background, at least by training. I used to fly planes, and I haven't flown in a number of years, but the three rules in the cockpit, aviate, navigate, communicate, right? And I think in this business, communicate, right? The three most important rules. What are some of since we're on the subject of mistakes, I think it was a mistake for that CM to accept the client. Clearly, in retrospect, in hindsight, the word no would have been much more profitable than the word yes, because the amount of money they paid the attorneys and the expert witnesses like me and others and deposition transcripts and just time that they'll never get back in their business life. None of that was big enough to have a net gain. They clearly lost money on the whole deal. And all that went to do is train the OEM to not, to write statement of works a little bit differently. But what are the common mistakes that potential customers make when they shop around for a CM? I'm going to throw one out possibly. Is it all about price? Is it all about cost per whatever? Or are there other maybe less obvious mistakes that people make when they are shopping for a contract manufacturer?
Okay, well, what we see, number one is price. We will, a lot of the supplier or a lot of the customers start out with, we're really worried about quality, price is not that important. But then when it comes time to award the contract, you were 3 cents higher than the other place. And we know that other place can't spell quality. And so that's a common thing. We're all about quality. Price is not important. It not always ends up that price is important. We used to try to be real competitive on that, and we still have to be relatively competitive, but we're not going to get a job just based on price. That's something we had to decide quite a while ago. Customers also, they've got to be realistic on their expectations and their requirements. If I talked about the different levels of IPC requirements, you may be coming in asking for something to be built to level 3 when it's really a level 1 or a level 2 product. And if somebody else is quoting it as a level 1 or a level 2, they're going to beat our price. You may not be getting what you want if it really is supposed to be a level 3, but that is, we're going to quote it like what you told us to.
That's interesting you say that, because the whole class system, class 1, 2, 3, level 1, 2, 3, however one phrases it, class 3 would be aerospace, medical. Class 1 would be electric toothbrushes and remote controls, things like that. Class 2, office equipment. What's interesting is Internet of Things, IoT, is electrifying everything now. Everything is a connected device. So, I use the example of an electric toothbrush. There is now an electric toothbrush made that connects to your Wi-Fi, that has an accelerometer and other sensors in it. So it can narc on little Jamie or Johnny or Jane and let the parents know how long they brush their teeth, maybe how vigorous they move the toothbrush, whatever the case may be. Now, clearly, that is a class 1 device, right? Because a failed electric toothbrush is not going to kill anybody.
Right. I was thinking you were saying it was going to shock little Jamie.
Well, that's a whole nother can of worms there, but we'll keep that can closed for a moment. But it clearly, from a the cost of failure standpoint, it's relatively low. However, manufacturers of toothbrushes, even if they sell a little $40 connected toothbrush, it still has to work, right? Because they don't want a bunch of warranty claims. That might have to be built closer to a Class 3 standard, just so that it will function in a harsh environment for a few years, even though it clearly would not historically be defined and traditionally be defined as a Class 3 device. I think those classes are morphing a little bit, because I can have a cheap product and I don't make much money on it, but it still has to last a year or two or three. Right. So I think your point is, back to your it depends, is if someone's shopping for the cheapest price and say, look, this is a Class 1 device because nobody dies if it fails, they might get it built for a few cents cheaper, but it may not be reliable. Right. No one dies, but except maybe the company's reputation, which could also be expensive. So it is a very blurred line right now. I think the class system or the level system, in terms of extra steps and higher grade materials and more testing, things like that, or better conformal coating, or whether it's conformal coated at all, really depends on in-use environment, not just the total cost of failure.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I grew up in a household that was NASA and then military, and neither one of those could you have a failure. I mean, it just wasn't an option. So everything had to be built to the absolute highest quality standard. And so I grew up in a house that believed that those would now be what's called level 3. And level 1 was the disposable things, and then anything else would be either level 1 or level 2. But now, a self-driving car or something like that, it would be hard to argue that's not level 3 and just as critical as something else.
Absolutely. The ADAS systems, the ADS systems on cars, which used to be, electronics in cars used to be infotainment, seat massagers, things that, is irritating if they fail, but nobody dies. Right. Now with adaptive cruise control and blind spot indicators and the semi-autonomous, driving, the LiDAR stuff, that stuff fails, people die. Right.
So, that definition of what's a level 1, level 2, level 3 is a little bit fuzzy these days. But, I've also always operated under the idea of a solder joint doesn't know if it's being built to 1, 2, or 3. So we do our best to build it right. It's the inspection requirements that can differentiate then. There's more inspection that goes on under level 3, or the tightness of those requirements are higher on level 3.
Sure.
But the solder joint itself should be built the same way.
Yeah, I remember back as you well remember, because it was in your blood, everything used to be, not everything, but the majority of the inspections would be the solder joint. Solder joint integrity, the right fillet on a through hole, whatever the case may be. Right. There's so much more now that has to be inspected, from ionic contamination or foreign object debris, which can cause frequency distortion and electrochemical issues, to voiding and thermal dissipation and conformal coating adhesion. I mean, there's so many. I'm just scratching the surface. There's so many things now that have to be right as we've miniaturized the board, and those boards are more frequently going out into harsh environments, which is really pushing the edge of the envelope. And the clock speeds, the frequencies on boards are just much higher now. The voltages on boards are particularly with electrification of cars, as you talked about, so much higher now that it's not just a 16x loop and does the solder joint look good. We've come a long way from that.
Right, and there's so many different ways now to look at a solder joint too, with X-rays and other things. So that's still the first. If the solder joint doesn't look right, and look is pretty standardized according to 610, if it doesn't look right, it's not going to pass anything usually. But if it does look right, in some cases that's good enough. That's all that it takes.
Right, and
but
when you say
for,
610, you're referring to the IPC standard 610, which is a quality standard, basically.
Right. And back in the old days, which may have been, what, 5, 10 years ago,
Could have been 10 minutes ago.
well, good point. We would visually inspect the solder joints, and that's how you determined if a board went out or not. And now, first off, things have gotten small, which means you can't see all those solder joints. Parts are designed differently, where there's solder joints underneath parts, so you can't see those without the aid of machines. And so the requirements for that inspection have gotten a lot more complicated.
Yeah, I've said this too many times on the show, but it's true. Well, it's not true technically, but I like to make the point. You talked about X-ray as an inspection tool. I'm pretty convinced X-ray caused voiding, because before X-ray, no one saw a void, right?
Yep.
So
that is true.
So damn X-ray.
It
Yeah, exactly. If it didn't fall off, yeah.
Right.
The card edge test, where you take a circuit card and you slam it on the board on its edge, and if the components are still there, ship it.
Yep.
So we talked about mistakes that potential customers can make when they're interviewing contract manufacturers. I own a business, as you're aware, and I've learned a long time ago that we interview our customers just as much as our customers interview us. Now, that sounds like a very arrogant statement, and I don't mean it to sound that way, but we choose customers as much as customers choose us, because if it's not the right relationship, no one's going to be happy. We won't make money. They will be unhappy. Our reputation will be damaged. And we don't want to take money from someone who's not happy. We want it to be a partnership. As Pollyannish as that sounds, it needs to be a partnership, even more in your industry. So what mistakes do you think some contract manufacturers might make? Or to put it more positively, what types of questions should a good contract manufacturer be asking of their potential customer? If you're shopping for a customer, what types of questions do you ask to help to ensure that it becomes a mutually successful partnership?
I'm going to ask them. I'm going to have a lot of questions about the product. How developed is it? Is it, you're telling, well, first off, I'm going to ask about their requirements and their quantities and how realistic those are. And have these been built before, or is this a new product? Because if it's a new product, there's probably going to be changes to it, which that's fine. It just needs to be thought of from the beginning. How firm is your quantity? You were talking about somebody that was, being asked to constantly increase their quantity. We could do that. I love increasing the quantity on something. But is that, we've got to know ahead of time, so we've bought the right parts and all of that type of thing. Obviously, I want to know your financial strength. Am I going to get paid for this? If, pick a big company, Boeing or Airbus comes in and they want 100,000 of something, that's great. But if, Dave's lawnmower shop comes in and wants 100,000 of it, we probably really need to be looking into that a little bit better.
Right.
Not that we wouldn't do it, but we might have to have some different requirements. We really want to see the design and know how finalized that is. We have made the mistake in the past of saying, you saying, yeah, I think it's going to be this, and we're like, yeah, we can do that. And then it turns out there were some changes, or there was material used or something that for whatever reason we couldn't do it, or we at least couldn't do it under the cost constraints that we had bid on. And a lot of times we've had to eat that. because we didn't ask the right questions. So now, before we give you a quote, it's going to go through our whole team. We used to try to get our quotes out really quick, but we have learned that we want to know as much as we can about this before we quote on something. So our manufacturing people, our quality people, everybody sees this and gets a chance to say, well, this part up here in the corner might be a problem, and we want to come ask you about that. And we'll do that before we actually submit the quote, which we do get some people saying, well, I really need this quote quickly. But in the long run, it pays off to ask all the questions, because sometimes we'll come back and ask you a question about it that you hadn't thought of. And you need, whether it's a testing requirement, an assembly requirement, or whatever. And if we make you answer that question, it's better for you and it's better for us. And
right.
While customers like to get their quotes quickly, that has made a nice impression on some customers that they went from being mad because the quote was late to happy because, hey, we've already solved a problem for them, or at least we show we know enough to ask about this.
Yeah, better to ask the question before you start building than during a failure analysis meeting to figure out what went wrong. Have you ever had a situation, you talked about sometimes you suggest design changes. We have a term that our industry embraces that I'm sure other industries do too. It's always a challenge, and that's design for manufacturability.
Right.
And sometimes a designer can design something, but you can't build it the way they designed it.
Right.
And maybe there's a very small part that has to be mounted, or they put right next to a giant copper ground plane or something, and there's solderability, wicking issues or wetting issues because of the heat loss, whatever the case may be. That may be a bad example, but have you had to go back to customers and say, look, that's a great idea, but if we just move this here and this here, it doesn't affect operation, but it would make your life, which then downflows to their life, a whole lot easier. Have you had to do that, and are customers generally open to that?
Let me answer with it depends.
It depends.
Yes, we commonly do that. What depends on is the customer going to do it or not.
Right.
Sometimes moving this diode from, this spot to another spot sounds so simple, but they've already bought 50,000 boards that would be scrapped if we had to do that.
They're
so
invested.
they'd rather pay us to do it by hand, that particular part, than redesign their board.
Rev B, they'll fix it in Rev B.
Exactly.
Right.
And how long Rev B is away, we never know. We have, I set in on a meeting every Monday morning, and I get the graphs with all of our quality numbers. And, sometimes they come with an explanation of exactly what you just described. This part is in the shadow of this part, and they all fail. We've submitted for redesign, and the customers promised us an answer within 2 months. But in the meantime, keep building. And, it makes our quality numbers look really bad. But, if I know there's an explanation like that, I can live with it.
Well, if they were building the product in-house, not using a contract manufacturer, that problem would be solved much faster. But because it's not their problem, it's your problem, I think they don't quite have as much empathy as they could, or desire, or urgency.
Yeah. Right. And we're very clear that we are not a design, we don't do original designs. We maybe have one or two over the years, but that's not what we really do. But we do make a lot of suggestions to change for better manufacturing abilities. And exactly what you're talking about there. And generally it's received well. It's just whether it's actually ever changed or not, because I don't know how many steps a customer may have to go through to do that. If it's a small place where it's one guy that's designed it and trying to get it built, that's pretty easy. Normally he's pretty happy to do it. But you go back to a defense contractor that has gone through, many levels of approval before they ever send it out to be built. It may take months or years for that design to change.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the issues plaguing our industry. One of them, of course, the big gorilla in the corner, supply chain. How has the supply chain crisis landed in your industry, specifically your company? And what can, if anything, what are you doing, if anything, to at least partially mitigate as much as you can?
Sometime last year or so, as CEO, I went from being a infectious disease specialist to a supply chain specialist, a world political specialist. And I'm not sure I was actually ever trained for either one of those. But
I don't think the people who are in the highest levels of government are especially trained either.
Well,
that's a whole nother show. But
I can't do a whole lot about that.
Right.
But no, I mean, it's definitely a challenge. It's not just a challenge to me and my company. It's that this is an industry-wide challenge that we just can't get the parts that we need to build in the quantities that our customers want us to build in. And it's not necessarily that their quantities have increased. It's just we can't get the parts to build anything in some cases. And the COVID caused, well, a lot of our parts come from Asia and specifically from China. And COVID caused various shutdowns of factories there and other issues that just set things back. There's been resource shortages that have caused parts to not be built in the speed we'd like them to. There's been all kinds of things that have disrupted the supply chain. For years, everybody wanted a just-in-time inventory, and those are the people probably that got hurt the worst. Right now, for the volume we're building, we're probably carrying more inventory than we've ever had. But there's problems with that too. I may bid on $100,000 job, and $50,000 of that are parts. And I go out and spend. I get the order. I go out and buy $50,000 worth of parts, or order 50,000, and $49,500 worth of it come in, and there's one 20-cent part that doesn't, and that means I can't build anything.
Right.
And now my customer's unhappy because they're not getting the parts I've promised to build for them, and I'm unhappy because I've invested $49,500 on stuff just sitting on the shelf that's not doing me any good.
Yeah. We are victims of supply chain, and we are also part of the problem. Because just like your company, my company went from just-in-time, which is nirvana. When just-in-time works, it's great because the money stays in your bank until you absolutely need it. And we went from just-in-time to just-in-case. So even though we put in probably 100x more effort, if we typically buy a part on demand, and we have the opportunity to buy a year's worth, we'll buy a year's worth now. Right. And we basically took whatever cash we had in the bank and just basically converted it to parts. So there's still an asset, right? But and in our case, because we manufacture products that don't change very rapidly, we know if we don't sell it today, we'll sell it tomorrow. So we're not really concerned about it. It doesn't go bad. It doesn't have a shelf life. But our walls are bursting at the seams with parts, and which drives me crazy, drives everyone crazy, because we don't need all those parts right now. But we owe it to our customers to have these parts in stock so we can service equipment we've already sold or build things that people need. So it's the only way around supply chain is buy everything you can when you can. It's like going to Costco. If you see something you like at Costco, buy it, because if you say, "Oh, I'll go buy it next week," it's gone, right? So
and you wonder, okay, if I buy 6 months worth, is that enough, or should I get a year? And if
Right.
I get a year, should I get 2 years?
Right. It used to be we would buy, I use a year as a placeholder, but if we would buy years worth of parts, if the price was right, then we'd like, okay, well, it's worth it. We'll buy it. Now we'll buy years worth of parts if we can even get them, right? It doesn't matter what the price is. I hope a lot of our vendors are listening to the show because it does matter what the price is. But you know what I mean? It's definitely challenging.
Yeah. And as a contract manufacturer, we don't have the luxury of building the same thing over and over.
Right. That's way more complicated than your world.
And we have some customers that we build a few thousand parts each month for. And those we've had some blips, but mainly we've been good on because we always had orders in. We always had a couple of months supply. So if they were a month late, we had a cushion. Like you were talking about, we have now started buying all we can of those parts, but we know we're going to use them. So those have worked out well. What's been tough is we have a lot of customers. They may be regular customers, but we build a variety of different items for them, and a lot of them we're building for the first time. So they walk in with those, and they're used to us delivering in 6 weeks, and now we're getting quoted that these parts are going to be here next March, and we don't have a lot of confidence that they are then.
Right.
And so those are the ones that's hurting us on.
How many of your customers, like from a percentage standpoint, supply their own parts, like in a kit form, to you, versus say, here's our bill of materials, you buy them?
Probably 25% supply the parts, supply everything. We do have what's become more common recently, and I like this, is we will buy the parts for the customer, but they pay us as the parts come in.
Yeah.
Because in some cases they're telling us to buy a year's worth of parts, and or there's a part that's expensive and it's got a 30-week delivery on it, and everything else on there has a 2-week delivery. So we're going ahead and billing them for that one that we're having to order way in advance, just to take
that makes
the risk
sense
out of it from our side.
I think this is a community effort. It's a village approach. It takes a village approach. I think a lot of the OEMs are going to have to step up and carry some of that inventory, either pay you to carry it or carry it themselves. People with deeper pockets than you and I might have, with the ability to buy a year's worth of stuff if they can find it, are better off. And they probably would buy more parts than a small contract manufacturer would, so they might have a little bit more, clout. They might have a shorter waiting ticket, to get served than a small CM would have.
Yeah, you're right.
So let's talk about efficiency. I had another production manager on my show a couple of years ago. It was a contract manufacturer, and his claim to fame was optimization. And I asked him point blank, can North American contract manufacturers compete with Asian contract manufacturers? And I was very happy with his response and surprised. He said, and his response was, absolutely. It's not about the labor. Everyone thinks you go overseas because the labor is cheaper, which is true. But if you have the money to put into optimization, into automation, you can take a lot of that labor out of the equation. And his, the sword he falls on is any manufacturer can be competitive with any other manufacturer, regardless of geological boundaries, or geographic boundaries. It's all about efficiency. And I kind of liken it to the aircraft industry, the airline industry, since you have that aviation background. You'll appreciate this. Almost every airline leases their planes. Most airlines don't, like Southwest doesn't own a single plane. They're all leased. So they make money when the wheels are up, and they spend money when the wheels are down. That's why a lot of airlines, the low-cost airlines, specialize in 20-minute gate turns and 3 extra flight segments a day and things like that, so they can keep more wheel up time than wheel down time. And I would think that in your world, when your reflow oven has boards going through it, you're making money, assuming you quoted it right. When it's sitting idle, you're spending money because that machine has to be paid for. So how does STI Electronics optimize that? How do you make sure that your products, your equipment, which is very expensive, right? I mean, the airline industry is one level of expense. I think we're pretty close to it. You know, you spend $1 million on a small surface mount line, you want it running. How do you go about creating that level of efficiency and optimization so that you have more time running than turnover, changeover time, maintenance time, things like that?
That's a good question. We're different than the person you were talking about that's trying to be so efficient. I can see their point on being competitive with Asian companies, but there's other things that go into that I'm not really sure that we can be. You're
well,
right.
they're probably, to be fair, they're probably a couple of tiers above most manufacturers. So they probably have a bank account that can spend a few $1 million on automation that would be difficult for a mere mortal to spend, right?
But as far as STI goes, I've been through industrial engineering classes and how to optimize things and all of that stuff. It's hard to apply to a place as small as us and with as many different jobs as we have. We do have 3 lines now. If you looked at our sales, it would probably be hard to justify 3 lines, but each line has come about for a different reason. And it's been a lot of the changeover times. If we're running a particular product on our main line, we can't completely shut it down to switch over. The timing of that is bad. So it was easier and cheaper, really, to have a second line. You mentioned if something's not going through the reflow oven, that's exactly how I look at it. I go back and try to walk around our manufacturing floor a few times a week, and the way our shop is laid out, one of the first pieces of equipment I walk by is the reflow oven. And the guys know the first thing I'm going to look at is, are there little yellow lines going down the conveyor belt? Because if they're not, you're right, we're not making anything. And so I want to see that, but we're also small enough that there's not always going to be yellow lines going down through there. We have equipment. We've got a selective solder machine. Okay, that's a machine that we bought for one particular customer, and we had one particular job for that machine, and that job pretty much paid for that machine. But I don't have a need for it every day. So it'll sit there sometimes maybe for weeks or a month without being used. But it does give me a capability that somebody does need. So it's not being used with the efficiency I would like for it to, but it has paid for itself.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it too, is what do you need to make off a machine versus, right. I mean, I assume you use your reflow oven because that is, a very key indicator, right? That's a benchmark. If that's not moving, there's probably trouble. But you're right, other machines that are used for more specialty things. And also, there's probably some machines you want to have just so that you can say yes to more customers. Yeah, we can do that, right? Even if they decide not to do it, they might go with you because they might need to do it, right? So,
hopefully we haven't bought any for that reason. But like the selective solder, we bought it for
you had a real job. Application for it.
And now I'm happy to tell you, hey, we've got selective solder if you need it.
Right. And it'll happen again. I'll guarantee if you sold the machine, you would have 3 jobs for it tomorrow. That's just the way.
Exactly.
That's just the way it works.
Exactly.
We got to wrap up. We're just about out of time. This has gone like lightning fast. Where do you see the contract manufacturing world and STI Electronics in general in the future. I should have said this earlier. Congratulations on 40 years. You guys started in '82. I just realized that's 40 years. So, congratulations. That's
Thank you.
That's I think business is measured in dog years. So you guys are a few hundred years old, by any other measure.
To quote the philosopher Jimmy Buffett, it's the good days and bad days and go and have mad days.
Exactly.
We've
Yes.
had a lot
yes.
of those over 40 years.
Absolutely. But you would do it again in a heartbeat. I know you well enough to know you would do it again in a heartbeat.
I would, simply because I like how, my life has been good, and the people I've met in the industry and all of that, there's no way to replace it.
Right.
If you told me financially how it was going to be 40 years ago, I might have been doing something else.
I don't think any of us do this for them. I don't think entrepreneurs do it for the money. They do it for the passion. They do it, like your father, Jim. He definitely was a driven person, and I never got the idea, or he never came across to me anyway as business driven, meaning he wasn't the kind of person that was looking for every opportunity to make a buck. I know you and I both know people in our industry that exploit everything they can, and that's not a slam on them. That's just their nature, right? They find a way to make money out of everything. Your father, it seemed to me, was quality driven. He was into how to build electronics correctly because he had that military connection, and things had to be done right. And he was a standards guy and a training guy and all that. And that's what, from a 30,000-foot press box view, that's how it appeared to me, which is probably why you've been in business for 40 years, because building a successful, no, let me rephrase that. Building a business that's going to make you billions of dollars is A, we're in the wrong industry for that, and B, most people don't last long. They do make money and then they burn out and they sell it to, to whoever, and then they crash it. It seems like you guys have a different mindset, which is why I can congratulate you for 40 years of business. But so much has changed in the last 40 years. This is what I was trying to get to. So much has changed in your business specifically, from a training company to running soldering schools and training aids and things like that, to what you're doing now. That was 40 years. What do you think the next? Doesn't have to be 40 years, but how much more change do you think is in STI Electronics' future and in the contract manufacturing world, the EMS world in general?
Yeah, I mean the supply chain issues may change some people's view of the contract assembly or contract manufacturing industry, but I don't think contract manufacturing is going to go away. As far as STI is concerned, I don't want to say we're going to stay the same, but our primary market is the low volume, high reliability, or maybe medium volume, high reliability. And we primarily work military, aerospace, medical, high-end industrial, and safety critical. I mean, we build things that lives can depend on, and we build those every day. And as a result, I think that's a good place for us to be, and I think we will continue to do that. So, as we talk 5-10 years from now, I think we will still be building that same family of products. Now, I am sure those products are going to evolve, so the technology we use to build them will be different. The parts that we're putting on will be different. They may not look anything like what we're doing now, and we will evolve with that. You mentioned training. We are still a training company, which means we keep up with the latest things, but we also have the best trained solderers and assembly people around because they're right here in this building. So, if we redo this, episode number 1001 instead of episode number 101, I think we will still be doing a similar thing. It will just be with some different technologies. I'm sure we will have added some things to it because we're always experimenting with how we can do something different. What market can we get into and all of that. But, and like we talked about earlier, the definition of a high reliability part has changed. So where it used to just be military, there's so many other things which open up possibilities for us to get into. I mean, we're doing more medical now than we used to. But you know, I can see there will be other categories that go along. I mean, I don't, you know, the electronics in cars and all of that, that's going to be increasing so much, but somebody our size is not going to be building car parts.
Right.
That's the different tiers. They're above us. But
or if you are building it, you're at the bottom of the food chain, building it for someone, building it for someone, building it for someone, then it goes to Bosch or Continental,
Right.
and then it goes to GM or Audi or whoever.
We looked at building for a automobile manufacturer several years ago, and this is the not saying yes to everything. As we went through the contract, one of the small details in it was if we were delayed or if we were late on delivering something, the penalty was $10,000 a minute. And
wow,
we decided then that, you know, this probably isn't for us.
Yeah, I have friends who, or colleagues, I should say, that are involved with the auto industry, and they're not just the punitive penalties; those are amazingly high because they live in a just-in-time world, right?
Right.
And which is the reason why Detroit has most of their vendors, you know, within 10 miles of them, or whatever
Right.
the case may be. But they also have a very bizarre payment schedule too. They have holdbacks where, you know, they'll pay you a percentage, you know, high percentage of what they owe within whatever time frame you agree on. But then they hold stuff back, and then, you know, you get that at the end of the year if you meet other benchmarks. I mean, it's definitely a I don't even think it's a carrot and stick. It just seems more stick than carrot.
Right.
But I guess the carrot is you get to build 20 million of something, right? That's the carrot.
Right.
But there's a huge stick applied to that. And
But it would be fun to know that, you know, on a Thursday in September, I'm going to build this.
yeah,
You know, right now, we're pretty sure what we're going to build tomorrow. Next week is starting to get into our long-term forecast, which keeps life more exciting.
yeah. One final question. I have a history of asking more than one final question, but we'll end on this. You know, we talked about the supply chain shortages. There's also, in most industries, they're also facing labor shortages. That seems to be a big problem. One thing I've always been impressed, and this is not a show about STI Electronics, you know, rah, go buy from them. That's not the point of this. My audience knows we don't go down those roads. But I do want to provide a compliment specific to your company. And the perception I see from your social media posts and all that is you celebrate your team, you celebrate your employees. And I see, you know, picnics and things like that. I see anniversaries. You've got what appears to be a very loyal and low turnover family of team members that work with you. Am I characterizing that correctly? Is that just a perception? Is that perception correct? And how do you do that in today's world of, you know, the stereotypical millennial who thinks that a long-term commitment is 10 minutes and doesn't really want to own anything, so they can afford to just walk away from something when they get bored? How have you held on to that traditional value of employer-employee in such a successful way?
Well, I appreciate you mentioning that, and we are very fortunate in that. I think our average right now for our employees is they've been here a little over 10 years. You know, there's good and bad to that. I mean,
Yeah, right. Yes, of course.
I've heard you talk about the gray tsunami, and I don't want to have it here.
Yeah.
But you know, we started out literally as a family company. You know, myself, my father, and my mother were there from day one, And so everybody we hired, we just kind of adopted into the family. Um, it's my wife works a few hours here and there, so she's here some. I think everybody does know her, but she's around some. But otherwise, we're really not family anymore. But we still try to act like it. So we try to treat people fairly. We try, we have to be competitive in our pay. That's been tough in the last few years, and it's tough right now as we watch, inflation and all the other things going on. But mainly, we just try to treat people right, and we try to hire good people, and I think I've become better over the years at hiring good people and staying out of their way. I haven't always done a good job of staying out of their way, but I think I've gotten better at it. We do lose some people sometime. I've got somebody tomorrow tomorrow is their last day, and I hate to lose them. They've only been here about 2 years, but they're a valuable part of the team, and we're out looking for a replacement, which is not so easy these days, especially when you're trying to be picky on who you get. But I hate to lose them, but I understand, and I wish them the best. A lot of times we've had people leave and then come back. And,
I've experienced that too. It's a sweet
I
feeling, and it's funny because it's not a "I told you so" moment. It's a gratitude moment. They need to, the Amish. So I understand the Amish kids that grow up when they become 18 or whatever age, they are allowed to leave the community and go off for a year, and they have a name for that. But the purpose of that is to make sure they really want to come back and be part of that unique lifestyle and go see the world, go see everything you're missing, go crazy. It's kind of the way, other communities send their kids to college. They have that crazy experience. And then those that want to come back and they appreciate the lifestyle that they grew up in, they appreciate it more. And I guess the same can be said for people who leave jobs in pursuit of greener pastures, and then they realize that it's astroturf, it's not really green, and they come back to a more on their own timing, and then they probably stay for life. They're probably lifers at that point.
Right, and they're also evangelists to talking with other people about, it's really not so great out there.
Right, that's true. Well, David Raby, thank you again for being my guest. And again, for my audience, if you would like to reach out to David, I'll put his contact information as well as his company's website on our show notes. I told you earlier how to look down on the show notes, and you can find that. And if you'd like to see the Concept to Creation podcast, all about David's mom and dad and David's journey in creating this 40-year-old successful company, it's a very interesting story. And David was extremely candid and talked about the hard days and the easier days. I never say easy; I'd say easier days. And that's a great insight into what goes on to build a business, particularly in a family environment. So I'll put a link to that episode as well. So David, I wish you continued success. I don't think you need luck; you've got a lot of that already. And thanks again for being my guest on the if I could even say it now, the Reliability Matters podcast. I appreciate you being here.
Well, Mike, thanks for having me. Thanks for doing these. I listened to all of them and really enjoyed it. I think you're doing a service to our industry by doing these. So thank you.
Well, thank you. As are you doing a service. I'm just the guy asking the questions. I appreciate your expertise, and the purpose of the show is to create an archive of knowledge. And as we talked about the silver tsunami, people leaving the industry. My hope with the show is that maybe younger people that come into this industry that know how electrons work because they've just been educated, but don't really know how our industry works, can gather knowledge from people like yourself who've been around a while and are very good at what they do. So thank you for your continued support of the show and me and everything else you do in the training and in the IPC world and SMTA world, our trade associations. I appreciate everything you do there. So, and I'll, now for those of you who are watching this or listening to this, we already had our 100th episode. You're the first. You're our next step toward 200 now. You're our first guest toward 200. David, I'll look forward to seeing you next week during the 100th live episode.
Okay.
And for those of you who said, what is he talking about? I'll put a link to a recorded version of our 100th live episode. Hopefully it happened, and hopefully it went off problem-free. If not, we'll show you a problem-free version. We'll make it happen. Thanks, David. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Well, that's another episode. Thanks for listening to or watching the Reliability Matters podcast. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Reliability Matters on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or on our newest channel, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast app. We're everywhere. A special thanks to Circuit Assembly Magazine's PCB Chat at pcbchat.com and Ascendo Reliability for syndicating the show. Ascendo Reliability is at reliability.fm. Thanks for all of your questions and episode suggestions. Please keep them coming. Send comments and episode suggestions to my email address, mike@mikekonrad.com. That's Conrad with a K. And be sure and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and click the subscribe button and bell icon to be notified when new episodes are released. We do release new episodes on the second and fourth Tuesday of each month. Once again, thanks for listening or watching the Reliability Matters podcast. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy, and perhaps most importantly, keep doing it right. I'll see you again in a couple of weeks.
Thanks for listening to the Reliability Matters podcast. Join us on the second and fourth Tuesday of each month for new episodes of Reliability Matters.